Okay, looks like we are live. Happy Friday, everybody. Probably just going to be a little bit of a shorter episode today. I just wanted to do some quick breakdowns of Bitcoin on a few levels, talk about a few other charts, and then get into an analysis I was doing on Bitcoin and ETH dominance at various key points over the last 4 years. I had kind of put together this chart and was really just spending a lot of time staring at it and trying to identify some patterns and some trends and some important things to note. And I figured I'd kind of go over that a little bit. But before we get into that, of course, I wanted to again remind everybody to follow my Twitch channel, become a follower, so that you can get alerts on when I go live, and also so you can comment in the chat. And then also follow my Telegram channel for alerts on all my upcoming shows. The links to all of that are in my Twitch profile. And lastly, every show is uploaded to my YouTube channel immediately after the Twitch, since Twitch only holds these episodes for 7 days. So the link to my YouTube channel is also in my channel description and the description of all my videos. Um, Also in my Telegram channel too. So let's get started. Basically, here's Bitcoin on the weekly. Not much has changed, as we know. We're still kind of boring summer sort of doldrums. Um, I know on Monday I highlighted this liquidity indicator, and that's, in a lot of ways on a sort of more macro level, this is going to be my go-to measurement of just what, is going to dictate price action, I think. Um, and as we can see, at least on the weekly level, it's been pretty much flat, which makes sense. Price action was down a tick, but overall, I'd say the trend is still flat. We're still above the 10-week moving average. We're still above the 20-week moving average. We did actually bounce off this trend line even a little bit. If you kind of zoom in, you can see, for whatever that's worth, again, as much as a diagonal trend line can tell you. But we bounced off of it, so that's something. And yeah, overall, structure still remains bullish relatively. Things are pointing generally upwards in terms of moving averages. Price is bouncing off of them, and I'll take it. It's something. It's something we can go on. So not so bad. And really, it's just kind of like ho hum, whatever. Just sort of sit around and wait it out. But let's take a look at it on the daily. Um, we can see price did kind of peak up, or I'm sorry, liquidity did peak up a little bit. Maybe that contributed to this decent looking daily candle we have today, that sort of continued to bounce off of that trend line. So yeah, more of the same, but just sort of a zoom in on that. And again, I'll take it. I'll take a bump in liquidity, although this liquidity has been moving up and down quite a bit throughout the week. And it's been, as you can see, up and down and up and down. So, who knows what's really going on there. But I think ultimately it is having an impact on price action. And, update today, update in price action. So I guess there you have it. Let's take a look at, oh, I guess, one thing people have been talking about is the whole deal with Twitter or X and Doge and a potential integration there, whatever that means. So I decided to take a stupid little long position on Doge. So far, that's not really playing out very well, as you can see. But again, who cares? It's not really much money. Um, ETH, I think, looks basically the same, if slightly less healthy than Bitcoin, again, like I mentioned on Monday. Although it was down below its moving averages, and it did manage to poke back up and hold them, and hopefully it holds them as resistance, even though they're almost exactly right in line with each other. So whatever, ETH is looking as strong as Bitcoin is. Ultimately, it doesn't mean anything though, because I feel like Bitcoin is kind of leading the show right now. And if you look at the Bitcoin ETH pair, it's kind of the same too. I'm really only paying attention to it on the weekly level here. I am surprised to see, though, that it has continued to hold this bounce off the bottom of this channel. And I don't know if that's going to continue to hold or not. We'll see what happens. Maybe it just needed to come back up and kind of do a mean reversion back up to the middle of these bands and bounce off the 20-week, and then it's going to come down and do an even lower low. We'll see. We'll see if it does manage to come back down into this range here. But I'm more heavily weighted in Bitcoin right now than I am in ETH, just kind of in general, because I do think that ETH is going to continue to run the show for a little while still. So Um, yeah, but again, interesting that we got a divergence flag here right at the bounce, right at the bottom of the channel, and so far that's continued to remain the correct, I guess, guess or indication. So interesting. And then sort of lastly, I wanted to, well, not lastly, but looking at BitTensor, another one of my sort of early alt plays. It's looking like, it was on a really good run here. It has started to roll over. We have noticed a little bit of a structural change, as in now it is dipping below the 10-day moving average, and I'm half expecting it to come down and touch the 20-day moving average. It's probably kind of due for that. Um, that's still healthy. That still doesn't really mean anything. And with this particular one, I'm going to be holding it, I guess, regardless. But um, I'm almost glad to see this. I feel like when stuff just kind of keeps going up and up and up and up without any sort of mean reversion, then it can come down just as quickly as it goes up in that scenario. And so this is actually what I would consider to be healthy price action. We want to see these mean reversions from time to time because that means that sentiment is getting reset. Stuff is cycling in and out. Profits are being taken. People are loading back up. That kind of thing. So yeah, we'll just see how that goes. A few other things. So I've been kind of doing a little bit of a research this week on decentralized perp dexes. And so I wanted to kind of dig into a couple of these charts because they are interesting to me. One being synthetics, and the synthetics BTC chart in particular. As I've mentioned, I really only focus on BTC denominated charts with altcoins, particularly in this phase of the cycle when we're starting to build up and everything's going up. Really, I only look at USD values with alts once we get into like the bear phase of the 4-year cycle, and that's when you're paying attention to everything. Because that's when you're typically looking at taking your big profits and sort of exiting all your positions, and so the USD chart is a little bit more relevant in that scenario. But in the build up and in the early stages, you want to always be looking at how things are going against Bitcoin because um, everything is going to go up in USD value in these stages right now. And if it's not outpacing Bitcoin, then really you shouldn't be in it unless you're sort of looking at a longer term hold and you have a plan to sort of buy at specific lows or things like that. But in general, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're looking at is doing better than the class benchmark. So on that note, Synthetics, they announced that not they, but that another company is going to be launching an exchange using their liquidity engine that they are, and that kind of created a little bit bump in price. It hasn't really shown yet to be enough of a trend reversal, certainly on the weekly against Bitcoin, but it's something that's sort of now on my watch list that I'm paying attention to. This bottom yellow line here is basically the yearly open price against Bitcoin for synthetics, and it has peaked up a little bit above that now. And this top line is really just what constitutes a higher high or a sort of break-in structure that I would want to sort of take notice of. So those are kind of the two levels that I'm paying attention to right now. Outside of that, of course, we have the 10 and the 20-week moving average, and it is nice to see it trading above both of those. But I, think that could very well be short-lived. I mean, it could just be simply following this sort of overarching trend that it's in right now and continue to go down for a ways. So this isn't something I'm going to jump into yet. It's something that I would need to, again, see a structural change in the form of a new higher high being set before I would maybe look to think it's got enough momentum to jump into a position. Um, but until then, I'm just going to kind of sit and wait. But it is on my radar. And then, oops, not that XRP, DYDX, kind of another one that is also a decentralized perp dex. It's more just going flat. I mean, again, here's the yearly open against Bitcoin, and it's basically almost right exactly at that same level, just a teeny tick above it. So not much to pay attention to there. But overall, this sector still kind of remains interesting to me as something that could have some legs this cycle. But we'll see, particularly if regulation is friendly towards it, which remains to be seen. And then GMX is the last one, and also it has had a nice pump against Bitcoin this week and a nice little rally on the daily, but it hasn't set a new structure yet, and it's well down against Bitcoin, or not broken structure rather, and it's well down against Bitcoin on the year. So It's early for this project. It's got a ways to go, but also it being a perpdex and also having an interesting business model is something that I'm paying attention to. And then lastly, let's look at this chart here. So what this is the top pane is ETH dominance, basically over, well, since like the 2017 peak. The bottom chain is Bitcoin dominance on the weekly level since the 2017 peak. And they're basically perfectly aligned with each other on dates, overlaid on top of each other. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to, a lot of people talk about the big rotations that happen throughout the cycles. When is it best to be positioned in ETH, and when is it best to be positioned in Bitcoin, and when is alt season, and what does that look like, and how do you know, and things like that. And so what I did here is I basically just went through. Let me just adjust the scale here a little. Is this synced up? Yeah. Um, oh, here. It's kind of annoying. I had it all perfectly aligned. There we go. Okay. So I went through here and just kind of made a bunch of notes of like major dates, like cycle highs, cycle lows, say the COVID crash, the couple different Bitcoin peaks, the 2017 peak, the 2021 cycle low, things like that. And I wanted to see what dominance looked like and what things were trending in during these times. And this is the kind of chart that, once you kind of get into technical analysis a bit, like sometimes I'll make a chart like this and I can sit and stare at it for, a half an hour and just sort of scroll through. Maybe I'll change time frames. I'll look at it on the daily. I'll look at it on the weekly. Sometimes I'll look at it on the monthly, and just sort of look for different things. And you can come back and do this, a handful of different times and notice new things each time you look at it. And this is really the kind of thing that makes me really love doing technical analysis, because this is sort of it's the deep dive stuff like this, the macro sort of deep dive stuff where you sort of get these more sort of profound insights, I feel like, than just doing regular everyday looking at price action, trying to see what's trending and whatnot. I mean, yeah, that stuff is obviously helpful and useful, but this also is something that can really help you inform your longer term theses and your longer term kind of investment strategies and decision making and things like that. And I think it's really important to take time to kind of make charts like this and really dig into them and look at them and try and find patterns and things that are going on. And so a few that I wanted to point it out here that I wanted to point out here. Let's start with just the first one with the 2017 Bitcoin peak. Um, this was a really big moment in crypto, if you were around at that point, because nothing like it had happened really quite in the same way. And we had this ICO craze going on with Ethereum at the time. And we can see, if we look at it down here on the Bitcoin side, Bitcoin peaked, and then we had this massive alt rally that immediately followed it, that went on for not a while long. I mean, another month ish, give or take, longer. But that's where like the big gains were made. Like if you were savvy enough at the time, and if you were tuned in enough at the time to sort of get out of Bitcoin and rotate into alts, this is where you would have gone from, you could have easily doubled or tripled your money again in these 2 or 3 weeks after the Bitcoin peak, if you were on top of it, or if you kind of knew that that was maybe what was going to happen. And if you look at it, it's just like that. You'll see, Bitcoin dominance tanked. I mean, bottomed out, and ETH dominance just, rallied and went on to crazy highs. And so, in fact, I believe this was like the all-time high in ETH dominance at this point. And so that's, important to notice, because again, we do see these rotations. And then as you kind of go through the bear market, you'll see Bitcoin dominance take over, and during this time, if you were around, you'll remember alts just bled out to nothing. I mean, they all just disappeared. They all went down. Some of them 95, even 99%. And this is when we saw Bitcoin really just sort of take back over. So this rotation is really very much of a quick thing. It's like a get in and get out. It's, Bitcoin has peaked, jump into alts, get your gains quickly and get out, basically. And so that's what we see here, because in a year-long bear market that we have at the end of each 4-year cycle, Bitcoin dominance is going to go back up a lot, and is going to retain the most value in the market space. And so, I mean, ultimately, yeah, I think a really savvy investor would just get out of everything altogether and dump to cash. But if you're one of those people that's maybe holding Bitcoin for a longer time frame, maybe you're on a 5 to 10 year time horizon and you don't care about a year long bear market, then that's fine. Just dump everything into Bitcoin. And obviously everybody's time horizon is going to be different. So I'm not telling you what to do here. I'm just pointing out that, in these scenarios, after you get this massive alt peak following the Bitcoin peak, it's time to get out, and it's time to either de-risk into Bitcoin or de-risk into to cash or stables or whatever it is you're going to do. Diversify into other asset classes, etc. The same thing happened again in 2020, I guess leading up into 2021, but something interesting happened here that I think is a little bit different. So, as we know, 2021 had two different peaks, um, unlike 2017, where it was just the one kind of major blow off top. And if you remember, like, let's go back to a Bitcoin chart real quick and just sort of take a look at this. Let me pick this chart here, take a look at it on the weekly. If you remember, if you were around coming into the end of 2020 and into 2021, Bitcoin just went on this epic rally. I mean, it went up. Let's see, what was it even? It was just, what do we got here? From here to here, let's just say, yeah, 500 plus percent. So, we're looking at a 5x in the span of basically a few months, of like the end of or the end of Q4 here into Q1 here, just almost nonstop with a couple of big corrections here in just strewn about cycle corrections basically. And so you could look at this and go, wow, Bitcoin was the place to be in this scenario. Like, look at that rally, that's crazy. But actually, if you go over and look at this chart, here's that rally. This is Bitcoin dominance in that rally. This is so, as good as you thought maybe Bitcoin was doing, this is ETH and alts blowing it out of the water, in relative terms, way outpacing it. And if you remember at that time, that's when stuff like Solana and like Luna and a few of these other big projects at that point in time were coming onto the market, and some of those just went up like stupid numbers. And so, it's different. It's different than the first cycle, because in the first cycle, Bitcoin fairly, was basically running the show. You can see in the lead up to it, and really peaked out, and then just immediately pumped, or dropped rather. And meanwhile, alt dominance was doing the opposite, basically going down hard, it bottomed out, and then rocketed up. But here, um, it was almost as if alts sort of led the way and kind of front ran it, and outpaced Bitcoin, tremendously in that scenario. Um, and then if we look at the second peak, we can see kind of a similar phenomenon actually, where alts peaked after, as they do, as they did here, and as they did back here. Um, but they were already on the run up, prior to the peak. So I'm not, I don't have an answer for what this means, but I think that the point being, this is why you make a chart like this. This is why you look at a chart like this, because then it actually prompts you to stop and think, okay, well, what was going on here? Like, maybe what do I need to research? Go back and look at what was happening in this time frame, and figure out, what can you learn from this? What insight can you glean from this? And this is what doing this kind of analysis will provide. It will ask as many questions as it will answer, but that's the whole point of it, is just a thought experiment to sort of look at what was going on in price action, comparing dominance, again with Bitcoin and ETH at various intervals at these significant dates, and seeing what price was doing. And then I want to point out too, the beginnings of the cycles. So okay, so let's look at this. As we know, Bitcoin dominance goes up in a bear market, and then you kind of come into an accumulation phase, for the early parts of the cycle, and we're seeing differences between this current cycle and the previous cycle that I'll touch on. So, starting at the low, here was the low of of 2018, which I think was in like September. Yeah, it went flat. It pretty much held it flat for some months, like all through kind of Q1 before Bitcoin dominance really began to peak up. Um, and go on a big run. Whereas this current cycle, Bitcoin dominance is really the name of the game straight out of the gate here. It's sort of running everything. And so I don't know what that means in terms of market sentiment. I don't know if back here people were still, a lot of people were trying to figure out what this market even was back then. There were tons of alt projects that had come onto the scene that had lost a lot of value, that were, pumping from just speculative investors. And, we went through this whole phase where people were like, okay, what even is crypto right now? Where is the value coming from in all of this? And what is worth paying attention to? Um, and I think eventually Bitcoin started to take off. And if you remember, like, let's go back and look at the Bitcoin chart again real quick. If you remember, wrong chart. If you remember, Bitcoin really pumped hard out of this first low. Like, and I remember thinking at the time, God, this doesn't make any sense. This is just sort of way too much too soon. Like it what is even driving this? And I think people were just sort of anxious to kind of get back in it after a year of downward price action and after this big huge capitulation into the bottom. It just seemed like people were anxious to get back into crypto, and it just sort of again speculative pumped. But you can see that again, what just like I was saying with this Tau chart a minute ago, when stuff generally goes up so much and doesn't really ever mean revert for weeks and weeks on end, you get, it has to kind of consolidate after that for a long time. And I wasn't at all surprised to see this, upwards of 6 months of price consolidation. And then yeah, we had this COVID black swan event in the middle of this. But I think even had this not happened, we would have still seen this sort of kind of lull into here and a slow buildup into this accumulation phase going. This kind of threw a big wrench in everything and actually made for a tremendous buying opportunity that nobody was expecting. But this isn't something that's going to happen every cycle, obviously. So hopefully. um, but the point being, I think that's what was going on here, Bitcoin wise. So if we go back to this chart, that's what was happening here. And then if you remember around this time, around March, April, May, this was really the start of DeFi summer. This was when Uniswap came on the scene. This is when like Aave and some of those early DeFi projects were really coming on the scene, YFI and stuff like that. And we saw a big run up into alts that actually, went for quite a while. Was it around, yeah, September, I think, right around the end of September, I remember, or beginning of September, is when that peaked out. And yeah, so this was altcoin summer, which drove the narrative. And again, each cycle is going to have their own specific story to tell and specific narrative. But then we can see, Bitcoin really kind of took off after that, until again the Solanas and the Lunas and the stuff came onto the scene, and everything just kind of went crazy at the end of this year, and alts really took over. And then if we go to now, um, it's a different story again, a different narrative. And we're seeing the ETFs coming online potentially, or the ETF filings being submitted. We're seeing the bank failures that are driving this notion that Bitcoin has a place in the global financial system and is being recognized as a legitimate asset, a legitimate reserve asset. And that's what's driving this narrative. And then meanwhile, you've got alts essentially just kind of flat. And I think that's reflective in a lot of the charts too. It's like they're there. There's a lot of building going on. There's a lot of, things happening. There's a lot of development happening, but nothing is ready to quite take off yet. And like I've touched on too in the past, ETH has its own separate narrative of its staking now that it's a proof of stake blockchain, that it is an interest-bearing asset that I think will attract some institutional investment, because of this sort of safe yield that it can generate. And that will come, and that will probably come in not too long. But for now, this is just another indicator that Bitcoin is really running the show and really driving the narrative right now, and really the place to be. And again, like I've said in past videos, I think that that's going to just continue to play out for the coming weeks, until we get to these first ETF potential deadlines. And just to kind of touch on that real quick, and then I'll probably wrap it up. We've got the first deadline here right around the end of August, beginning of September, which again 50-50 if they're going to get approved. I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic here and think that it's probably crazy to think that they're just going to get approved right out of the gate, unless of course BlackRock knows something we don't. I mean, all of these filings kind of say they know something we don't, but still I can't imagine the SEC as down on crypto as they've been throughout the year, unless they're under some kind of political pressure to grant these big TradFi institutions sort of access into this space as kind of just a gimme. It's probably not going to go through on the first try, which means they can push it out again another 45 days, which would put us into the middle of October. At which point they can opt to basically um, enter into proceedings, and have like essentially hearings and comment, open it up for comment, things like that, and that can last actually up to 288 days. So totally, the SEC can sort of legally kick the can for like I think it's 340 days total, give or take, which would put us well past the halving of next year, by I think a few months even. So I don't want to get my hopes up on this, and I think that if we, obviously if they kick the can on the first one, which I'm expecting, I don't know what's going to happen with price, unless some other economic things come into play, unless we get more bank failures, unless the Fed comes on and says they're going to start lowering rates, or injecting liquidity into the system somehow or another. Ultimately, this liquidity is going to kind of dictate whatever happens, no matter what. But there will be policies that will need to be made that will ultimately dictate this liquidity level. Um, so that's what we'll see. And then going into Q4. Um, I give more of a chance of the second uh, approval deadline being likely than the first, in which case that kind of would fall very much in line with, typically you see the best price action for Bitcoin in general in Q4 and Q1, just kind of like we did, going back to this previous cycle, um, back in here. So will we see? I don't know. Obviously, it all remains to be seen, but those are the things I'm paying attention to. And going back to this chart to kind of wrap it up real quick, that's what's being shown here in terms of Bitcoin dominance. And I think Bitcoin dominance is going to continue to run the show, at least into Q4, maybe into Q1 is sort of my guess, um, because there's just yes, there's a lot going on in alt world, but that's not where all the eyes are. We need to start seeing adoption take place. We need to start seeing real new innovation and products come online that people are using. And again, this first year of the cycle, it's always an accumulation year anyway. Nothing is ever going to go crazy in an accumulation year, except for like meme coins like Pepe and stuff like that. But the name of the game right now is just patience. And clearly this chart is saying stay in Bitcoin until this structure changes and until told otherwise, basically. So I'm going to stay in Bitcoin for the most part, until I see a structural shift here, and then I'll look to rotate. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to end it. I went on a little bit longer than I thought I would, but thanks for watching if you watched, and yeah, happy Friday, everybody, and I'll be back on Monday. So have a good weekend.